we're in this fine line of war. So you have to really pick and choose what you're going to do to this country, because if you stop everything to this country, people are gonna die, regardless of if it's with bullets or what. A lot of people are going to die.
Oh, I gotta go. I've been working, told them please don't hit my phone. I'm in my zone, bruh, just leave me alone. Was on the road, but I swear I'm coming home. Now the drinks on me, I think we need a toast. See, I did it for me. Now my old friends calling, told them nothing's for free. Told me time is money, dog, swear I paid all my fees. I was starving for this game, now my family can eat.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Cup of News episode with your hosts Peter and Matt here. Thank you everyone for tuning in and joining us, listening, taking time out of your day to chat with us. We appreciate you guys. And throughout the episode, if you feel like you found value in this episode, please give it a like, comment, subscribe, or hit the 5 stars on Apple, Spotify. This is what grows us as a channel, motivates us to keep on producing this high quality content. So yeah, thank you. And any updates for us, cupofnurses.com. Everything is there. Our website looks clean. The shop, the merch, the new merch for Cup of Nurses that we're wearing for March looks clean. And we're going to have some new designs coming out in April and every single month moving forward, because that's what we do here at the Cup of Nurses. And Frontline Warriors for anything related to consciousness. And then also Pronto, the revolutionary app that's going to innovate healthcare industries, coming very, very soon. We are working diligently on it. Sometime in April, I hear. Little bird told me, right? Anyways, Pete, how you doing? I'm thrilled for this episode because we always talk about some cool stuff, especially some breaking news. What's up?
Another great episode today for you guys. Due to the ongoing conflict in Europe, we are doing a special episode on the conflict going on in Ukraine. Russia is undergoing an attack on Ukraine and attempting to seize control of its country and expand its borders. So, just to take a look back, we have done a few of these couple news episodes with some predictions and some ideas on why certain things happen. And
we are accurate.
Yep. And not to stroke our ego here, but a lot of our predictions did come true.
Like in 2020, if
we'll
you
give ourselves credit here.
If you go on our episodes from like 2020 and the whole pandemic thing, you look some things up, what our predictions were, what we thought where things are going, it took place.
Yeah, and even our health stuff is the same thing. Like when we talked about intermittent fasting, then like 6 months later, there was an intermittent fasting trend going on.
A little boom.
Different kinds of like cancer things. We are ahead of the game on a lot of these topics, which is interesting to see. And I'm not saying we're never wrong, but I feel like we make pretty good hypothesis, and we take a lot of things into consideration. We do a lot of research on these episodes, and this is why a lot of times we're right. And it's cool.
Yeah.
And it's cool because like it's not the fact that we're right. It's not the cool part. The cool part is like looking up stuff, doing the research, and trying to make your own hypothesis about these things and theories on why a thing happens, and you try to figure out what's the actual reason. And it's just interesting because we each have our own biases as people, as humans, and it's good to be able to learn how to put your own biases aside, and then with that being said and that being done, you're able to kind of figure out why things actually happen. Because once you eliminate those biases, you could actually take a full picture view on a whole situation and not getting too emotionally involved or having your preferences based on like your past experiences. And I think when you take like a bird's eye view of that and try to eliminate your bias, you get the full perception and you're able to make a better prediction. Just like, because men are nurses, for those of you who don't know, and same thing goes in nursing. If you get too fixated on one theory or trying to almost prove yourself right, that becomes an issue. Because the best thing to do, the best way to figure out what's going on with your patient and to cure him or help him out of their difficult situation is to take a bird's eye view. You can't be too targeted. You have to first take a bird's eye view, a big look at the clinical picture, and then you could slowly narrow down certain situations. Is it a liver issue? Is it a kidney issue? Is it a heart issue? One by one, and not really looking at, well, you have to look at your past, but not really get too involved in like one system. That's the beauty of this whole research, and not to go off on a tangent off the rip.
Yeah, and that's why I love this show and what we do, is because any single topic we have, whether it's Ukraine or Russia now, previous topics, we always have an unpolarized view. We look at everything, and just like you said, we take the full perspective and we try to give you guys the best way to judge your own to use your own judgment on the scenario based on what we provide as information that's hopefully unbiased for most of it, and you create your own perspective on it. And that's important because I want everybody to cultivate that ability to just create an own opinion, and it's okay to own that truth. Because we didn't agree to something, we kind of went through the tribulations in 2020, and that was our truth, and whatever it is. And you should do the same, whether if you think you have a different opinion on things, hold on to that. And then kind of going back to Ukraine and Russia, it's crazy how all of a sudden all the eyeballs are on this topic. We're kind of recording 2 weeks out of when this episode airs, so everything that might be up to par as far as information. But what's going on, there's been an invasion for over a week, and there's a lot of sanctions, and the world is speaking up on what's happening.
It's definitely some troubling times. We go from one crazy issue being a pandemic to what it seems like almost the brink of war. But to give you guys a little bit of a geography and a little bit of a history lesson, quick synopsis on Ukraine. Ukraine is the second largest European country after Russia. So to give you guys a perspective on the size, it's bigger than Poland. It's bigger than all the other. It's bigger than Germany. It's bigger than all the other European countries besides Russia. As you guys know, Russia's a really big country, but a lot of it's uninhabitable, and a lot of it's frozen over. So only the western part of Russia is actually the primary focus of where Russian people live. Ukraine also shares its borders with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. Ukraine also has a coastline along the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea, which makes it a very strategic location because it does have access to the Black Sea, which is a very important sea in the European area. After the Russian Revolution, a Ukrainian national movement for self-determination emerged and was internationally recognized as Ukrainian People's Republic on the 23rd of June in 1917. So Ukraine got its independence and actually was recognized as a country in 1917. So it's been around for quite a long time. In 1922, the Ukrainian SSR helped establish the Soviet Union. So at one point in time, Ukraine was actually part of the Soviet Union back in the Cold War era. And then eventually Ukraine then got its independence back again in 1991 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So Ukraine actually has a really long history. It's really big history. It's very much tied into Russian history, very closely aligned. Their languages are pretty similar, but then again, it is its own country. And it being its own country, countries don't like to get taken over by other countries. These borders are established for a reason. Same way, take if like Canada decided to invade Washington or Maine, you'd be kind of upset, even though maybe Canada says like, hey, we have a claim on this land because of this, and this, or maybe they just do it because they want to. You get naturally upset.
Yeah, and European history is confusing. I'm European, and sometimes it's hard to understand everything because back in the day, just like Poland was off the map, literally on one side is Germany and Russia. They were divided too. There was like a whole petition to remove us off the map for over 100 years. And it was Austro-Hungarian. World War I started. A bunch of countries got involved. Russia. And that pushed a lot of things to do like a treaty. And World War II happened. And then you have the fall of the Soviet Union. And finally in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, and Ukraine became an independent country. And this is just a few decades. And what's interesting about this whole entire war and everything happening is that there's parts of Ukraine that were pro-Russian, that still belong to Russia, that basically treaty was okay to sign, and this is other people's land. So this is the big discussion that Ukraine and Ukrainian people are a lot more Russian than anything else. Not to say that that's not okay to invade a country. We're just going into like the history and to understand the perspective of maybe why the Russians are being so aggressive towards that. So we're just painting the full spectrum because it's not just a one-sided coin of an evil dictator overtaking a country. There's a lot more history and background. But as you know, the United States, we're like the police state of the whole entire world. So we have to kind of dip our fingers into everything. But because that happens, there's only a one-sided picture that gets shown in public and in mainstream media just to push the agenda of what should happen. If we want to be pro a specific country, well, we have to show information to show that point, and that's just how the world works, unfortunately.
Yep. And when you bring up Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, things get a little bit more foggy and murky because where Kiev is located, that has said to be the birthplace of Russia and the start of the Russian Empire, you could say, and a Russian country. So naturally, that being in Ukraine and Ukraine thinking about joining NATO becomes an issue because the Russian people feel that if Ukraine should be aligned with somebody directly, they should be aligned with Russia, given its deep roots with Russian history. So it's almost like the Russian people are feeling betrayed that Ukraine is deciding to partner with NATO and deciding to kind of ignore Russian, you could say, political values and the history of it. So basically, the little story is that Moscow's ruling establishment feels so emotional because the first Russian state, called Kievan Rus, was established in Kiev 12 centuries ago. Even the name of Russia originated in the name with this loose confederation of Eastern Slavic, Baltic, and Finnic nations. Rurik, the founding leader of the Kievan Rus dynasty, has been considered one of the godfathers of the Russian state. So with that being said, this has very, very deep roots in Russian history, because literally Russia was founded in Kiev, and now that it's part of Ukraine, which Russia was okay with, but now since Ukraine wants to join NATO, this becomes an issue because Russia thinks that Ukraine, having its roots in Russian history, should be more aligned with Russia. Because for those that don't know, NATO is a North American trade organization, trade organization.
Yeah.
NATO, North American trade organization, where most of Europe, the United States have like an alliance going on that they help each other. They help each other militarily, and given Ukraine's strategic location, it borders Russia, so having a big NATO presence pushes the United States' interest into Ukraine as well, and kind of pushes out Russian interest, because given the president that we have and the times we live in, it seems to be like the ruling party of the United States of America is anti-Russian in a sense.
And if you look at NATO was created after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1992. So if you have a treaty that's against a country that was created, and now that country is part of that alliance that's a couple hundred miles away from Moscow, that becomes a problem to your defense as a country. I don't know if I want to get into this now, because I was going to start talking about. Okay. Yeah. Before we get into this, because I'm already ready to go ham.
Yeah. So where does like this Russian aggression start? So Russia has been aggressive with shifting its borders for like the past decade. So ever since the dissolution of the Soviet Union and kind of the breakdown of the KGB, you could say, some other people still think that KGB still exists, just under a different name, which makes a lot of sense. But it could kind of say it got, this Cold War thing got reignited in 2014 with Crimea. Russia came in and annexed Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, but the world and the nation still see Crimea as part of Ukraine.
Yeah, even there's like separatists there, and it's mainly pro-Russian.
Yeah, so it's a little bit confusing, a little bit sticky. Who does Crimea actually belong to or what? But now, given modern times, Russia has stepped in beyond Crimea. They're into other cities and towns in Ukraine. So they started like a full-on invasion almost at a certain point. So why did Russia attack Ukraine? There's a lot of speculation involved behind this. Some people think it's a power grab / land grab by Vladimir Putin, which is the president, you could say, of Russia. Some people say that he wants to bring back the Soviet Union countries that are part of it. So that's a few countries.
Part of the process.
And a few countries in Europe that belong to it. At one point, he wants to regain that land. So there's a lot of speculation. But the first one I want to go over is natural resources. So Ukraine has an abundance of the most valuable resources that exist on the earth. Natural gas is a really big one that they have. So natural gas is very interesting, because when I was doing some research, is that they have their oil reserves and their natural gas reserves are very untapped in that country. So whoever kind of gets access to that, and once the Ukraine actually gets involved in this and getting this oil and natural gas, they have one of the largest natural gas and oil production capabilities in all of Europe. Wow. So this is a very important place for natural gas and oil for both Europe and United States, because there's NATO around, so there's pipelines that go in there, and it's a very big oil and natural gas interest.
Yeah, and it's for your benefit as a country to economically not enslave a country, but make you dependent on it. For example, if Germany's a large consumer of Russia's natural gases. If your country depends on 55% of the natural gases, and now you have to create sanctions against that country, so now you can't export your natural resource from Russia because you're trying to economically hurt them, it's a big problem. You got to find some other pipelines, and especially if you have a pipeline that goes from Russia to Germany itself. So what happens then? And that's what's crazy, is because when these wars break out and countries are in turmoil, you have to have private organizations that have to interfere with this too, which creates a crisis, which we're seeing right now with mainstream media, to the point where Disney's not going to allow a specific show to air because they're trying to sanction a country.
Yeah, it's madness when it happens. Yeah, and what Matt was talking about, that pipeline, it's called the Nord Stream pipeline, and it goes from Russia through Ukraine all the way to Germany, and that delivers a lot of the oil that Russia produces. Because, like we said a minute ago, Ukraine has lots of reserves, second most in Europe, but they're untapped, so they still have to get worked on. The amount of oil there is a lot. It's just that it's much easier for Ukraine to just get it from Russia, but that's relying on Russia. So, yeah. But with that pipeline, Ukraine makes $7 billion off that pipeline, just for allowing it to be going through the country, which is wild. Which then is a very interesting situation, because if Ukraine's getting its oil, like you mentioned, if Ukraine's getting their oil from Russia and Russia's invading Ukraine, then is Russia not giving Ukraine oil? Or is it still like hey, war's going on, but business is business. We'll still sell you this oil because we still want to make some money.
Yeah, I would hope it's business is business. But now when you're hearing the things on the internet and mainstream news, is that they're trying to hurt the Russian oligarchs. Mm-hmm. So I would think they're trying to really hurt Russian billionaires and things like that. And also Ukraine has a huge reserve of lithium and titanium. So those are very precious metals for our future. Maybe that's the thing you want to conquer and control as a country, because our batteries, electric cars, computers, our technologies on relying on lithium.
Yeah, lithium power. Every battery that you have and every single thing needs lithium. So it's very important to have. And it's what's actually interesting about their lithium operation there in Ukraine is there's actually a bidding war and a competition going on for who is going to own their lithium stores. So private companies have to come in and mine this. So right now there's a Chinese lithium company and an Australian lithium company that are both bidding on who gets these lithium stores, which is crazy. There's literally a bid going on for who's getting lithium stores. And then titanium, that's very important in making planes. That's a big aerospace ore, you could say. Lots of iron in Ukraine as well, and other raw metallic materials, you could say, which is wild. So if you think about resources, like, they're very important, because without these resources, like iron, you can't have a lot of things that you take for granted. And it's crazy to think about how important these things are and where they're located in the world, because whichever country has these things, well, guess what? They have the building blocks for these things that we have all around us in our homes, the cameras that we're using, these microphone stands that we're using. It all comes from somewhere. It's all made from some kind of a resource, right? So if you own the building blocks to these items that people need for daily use, well, guess what? You have a greater control of the world. So it's wild.
Yeah. Something to think about. Mm-hmm. Oh, I lost my train of thought. I was going to talk about another resource and how it's effective. But anyways, it'll get back to me. So why does Russia fear so much of Ukraine entering NATO and EU? Well, for one, it's military and strategic. Like we talked about the treaties and how the Soviet Union got broken down. but also what's been happening in Ukrainian government. And this kind of takes us back in 2010. So there was a presidential election with Viktor Yanukovych, if I'm pronouncing that right, and he was on the side where he wasn't pro-NATO. He was more with the Russian influences. And when that happened, a lot of anti-government protests broke out in Ukraine. That was all on the news. And long story short, the Ukrainian government got overthrown, which was pro-Russian, and something that was pro-NATO got established. Whether there was American influences, we don't know, but this story goes back way, way back to like even the whole Hunter Biden laptop stuff, which we didn't even have time to look up for this show. And just from like statistics, so back in 2013, I believe that there was, after the annex of Crimea, there was a lot less support for Ukrainian membership to NATO. After that, up to 69% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO versus 28% in 2011. So that just shows you the influence that took place in this past couple decade. And if you go back to Ukrainian roots and you're from Russia, you're like, wow, they overtook this government and they created democracy. And we do that as United States in different parts of the world. And we think it's a good thing to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that other countries feel the same way. So we have to be conscious of other cultures and what their stance are. Just like Afghanistan and the Taliban, they overtook that country again, and people are happy about it. Even though there was stuff on the news of Taliban, when I was like on Twitter accounts and looking things on, people were happy that Taliban came back. So we see it so much different because we're just creating democracy in other parts of the world and not necessarily beneficial for the greater good.
Yeah, Afghanistan is just a very interesting topic because you can say that Ukraine is more developed than Afghanistan. If you look at Afghanistan as like, not to go into rabbit hole of Afghanistan, but if you look at Afghanistan's geography, it's very hard to have a one government control around it because it's composed of a lot of secluded and isolated towns. So it's very hard to have one thing rule everything because it's hard to get from place to place, and still up a very poor country. So that makes things even harder. So that's why Afghanistan was a little bit difficult, because it was almost like a place that was ran by tribes that have control over different parts of it, and uniting that always becomes an issue, especially if you have a tough geographical location like Afghanistan. So that's a whole nother episode all by itself that maybe we'll have one of these days.
And just to paint another perspective on maybe how Russia feels. So I was looking up a speech from February 24th, 2022. And this is Putin just talking about what he thinks about NATO, because NATO is this big police of the world now that we have, and it's a branch of United States, and they have technically broken multiple treaties and international law, but technically it doesn't. They create their own circumstances and they interpret it their own way. Perfect example is Syria. We conducted combat operations there with the whole Western coalition. There was bombings that the Syrian government didn't approve of, but we went in there and we still created that. Why? And then it kind of goes back to also Yugoslavia. So NATO conducted bombings from 1999 from March to June. Those were also breaking international law. So what happened there is Yugoslavia had some kind of communist dictator that was creating an ethics cleansing of Albanians. So what happened is NATO and other countries saw that potential. Maybe it was destabilizing the country, and just decided to bomb and create its own government, which eventually is now Bosnia and Herzegovina. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. But anyways, and then also in this speech, he mentions Iraq, Libya, and also Syria. So NATO and the United States technically uses illegal use of military power against other countries. And we use the United Nations Security Council to sway decisions and make things happen. Just like Gaddafi we mentioned before, we create a no-fly zone. He's a dictator. He wants to sell his oil and the petrodollar, which is another episode you guys should check out, the petrodollar. And then bam, we decided to create a no-fly zone and kill a dictator in another country. Is that okay? right?
Yeah, things get
It's
sketchy.
fucked up to think about.
It's sketchy, yeah. Because if you're Russia, this is how Russia views NATO. Russia views NATO as a Western influenced organization that United States could interfere with European affairs, because NATO is basically a treaty between Europe and the United States that they're working more closely together than the non-NATO countries. So it's almost like and you know, you could kind of see what Russia's talking about and actually understand that, hey, you know, this is a feasible thought process, that it's the West's hand into Europe through NATO, which is very valid. Yeah.
And
then
last thing, I was going to say last thing about that speech. He quoted something: in many regions of the world where United States brought its law and order, this created bloody, non-healing wounds and the curse of international terrorism and extremism. ISIS, you have the whole Taliban thing, and then also I looked up into Libya. Literally a decade after the bombing, there's still crisis and government destabilization happening there.
Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective, because U.S. is its police state, and we go into countries and we take on wars and battles. So technically it's okay for us to go into these countries, but when another country attacks another country, is that not okay? So is the United States the only country that's able and allowed to attack other countries with their interests?
But yeah, but not this one, because Ukraine is a good power grab for us.
Yeah, so of course no war is good, and you know, war shouldn't I feel like war shouldn't happen. And the 21st century and that we live in, how is war still going on? Sometimes it still perplexes me, but it is what it is. War is never good, and it's never good for a majority of people. Only a slight minority of people actually benefit from war. Same way a small minority also benefit from economical collapses, pandemics, and other crazy traumatic issues that happen in the world. Yeah. But you gotta understand that we are American, so we have a little bit of a American ego, because you could say we helped basically we saved the world in World War II. So we have a little bit of ego on our shoulders that, hey, we came in World War II, basically saved the world from a all-out Nazi invasion. And that from then we kind of felt that, hey, we're the country that kind of knows best for the world. And that's kind of how things always stood. So is war ever good? No. So how can war be good when we try to attack these smaller countries in the Middle East or in Europe or other places in Africa?
Yeah.
So like, where's like the line? How does that work? How can you be a country that attacks other countries, and then with another country starts war with somebody else, you said no, it's bad? How does it make any sense if you yourself doing it? That's hypocrisy. No war is good, and the fact that the United States is conducting war is bad, and the fact that Russia is conducting war is bad.
Yeah, another interesting thing to wrap that up, because we're just showing one side, so we're very good at taking emotion out, or we're just talking straight facts, right? On the news, there's a lot of refugees happening, running away to different countries, trying to escape this. Russian people are killing civilians, which is unfortunate. That's war, especially trying to take over countries. But why did all of a sudden this matter of just this specific event? What happened in the past couple decades in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, bombing innocent people the United States conducted?
Hong Kong and China, that was on the news for a little bit, now it's completely gone.
Yeah. So that's happening, and that was bad, where people dying, but no one put emphasis on it. No civilians in America cared about it. But all of a sudden, when the news wanted for you to care about that event happening there, all of a sudden it was bad. But what happened in the past couple decades? There was millions of casualties. I don't know how many you make up millions here, but there's thousands, hundreds and thousands of casualties that happened across the Middle East wars, but no one gave a fly about it. All of a sudden now, everyone cares about this one country, and we're raising money and supporting, and we're sanctioning from private corporations to celebrities. Like, why? Why does it all of a sudden matter? And that makes you think about what are the greater things happening at play, interest that the media wants you just to think about that one perspective. Yep. Is it just NATO? We don't know. We don't know what Putin's involvement is going into this. Is it just NATO? Is it resources? we could only speculate how this all plays out, but there's definitely more that meets the eye. And it's not fair just for one country to say it's bad, but yet you've been doing shit and dropping bombs and killing people too, technically.
And then what is the rest of the world's response to this? The response from Europe, the response from the United States against this invasion of Ukraine by Russia is sanctions, which is completely mind-blowing to me how sanctions work. And I've never been in a country where there was a war going on, like World War II in Poland, and how it slowly unfolded. I have never lived. I don't live in Ukraine, nor have I been in Russia during times of war. So I'm not really sure how directly sanctions affect people. But when I think about it and when I look at it from like an outsider standpoint, like this only to me impacts the middle and lower class, because the wealthy rarely get impacted by anything. And if they do get impacted by something, well, guess what? They're wealthy, so they probably have lots of money in reserve, so they're not going to get affected in like the short term. Or actually, they might get affected in the short term, but long term they have enough money to keep them going for a while. Because when you think of war, you have soldiers going into people's neighborhoods, into people's homes in Ukraine, and then with sanctions, you're directly impacting citizens and people of Russia, people that might not have had anything to do with this decision. Majority of citizens don't have direct control or direct influence on Russian politics. Same way the United States does. Same way us citizens don't have a direct approach to what Joe Biden does or Congress. We just elect them, and that's basically they make the choices for us. Same in Russia. So
yeah,
if you put sanctions on people and you sanction their food, you sanctions on what they could import. You don't buy their exports, and now people don't have any exports to produce, so you're hitting the working class citizen of Russia. Now the impoverished people get hurt even more, because now there's less food in the upper rankings, upper classes of society. So now the lower classes are going to get affected even more on food, because things don't trickle to the bottom; they usually trickle to the top. The higher you are on like this food chain or the socioeconomic class, the longer you have access to these resources, and once they dwindle, they dwindle from the bottom up. Which is crazy.
And like the spotlight is on Ukraine refugees and civilians dying. What if 50,000 people die in war, but because of the sanctions, 10 million innocent Russian people starve because of like the lack of food or money transaction in that country, which had nothing to do with any of them. So where's the balance being between for the greater good and what's right, what's wrong from that? Even the whole sports thing, how sports teams can't play that the Russian F1 race car people can't compete in tournaments. What does that have to do with sports? Why are we involving all that? Like, there should be levels to what you can sanction. Now all of a sudden celebrities are saying, I'm gonna take this movie down on Netflix in Russia, and like, dude, you're hurting innocent people. It has nothing to do with these people. Just let them at least watch Netflix and enjoy it while their dictator's doing some shit.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know how this happened. I don't know how people cannot agree to the point where there has to be a war involved. It's always been mind-blowing. Like, have you held on something so bad that you didn't want to let it go, that you had to pay somebody basically to fight that thing for you, or beat the shit out of somebody until they switch their views? Like, it's crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy to think about.
Even like, look what happened in our past with Poland and Germany, Russia. They killed innocent people. Should you despise a Russian and a German based on the history that they've done? And anybody listening, you shouldn't hate a culture that's, let's just say, Russian because of what they did in these past couple weeks. That's okay. That person is that person, not the greater sum of an event that took place.
Yeah, so there's this theory that I've heard a couple of days ago, and I do agree with this theory, that if you look at where humans were thousands of years ago, or hundreds of thousands of years ago, or millions of years ago, or whenever you could say the human beings first started. So let's just, for example, think of like the 1780s or whatever, because that's kind of like a time that people could maybe think of, like the medieval ages, if that was medieval age or whatever. But let's take like 1700s, for example. So in the 1700s, when somebody came in, or like a group of people came in on like a bunch of boats, that was always seen as a threat, because it was always somebody trying to take over somebody for some reason. And we've always grew up like that. And even back when we first became humans, there was always tribes, there was always tribal warfare, and there was always a tribal mentality, which means our tribe is good, other tribes bad. And it's crazy to think about that, because if y'all stem when do we start separating from each other and into like these tribes if we came from kind of one organism, which if you kind of look at history and kind of genetics, you kind of, and geography and locations, you kind of figure out why it happened. But it's crazy to think that those genes and those instincts are that deeply still programmed to us, that we naturally think that somebody else is naturally against us because they're coming in on our turf, because that's how we've always seen others as off the bat. Off the bat, your first judgment of somebody is always going to be as an intruder. You first meet somebody for the first time, intruder. If somebody walks up by your gate,
safety.
Yeah, right, and that goes to the whole stages of what is it? Erickson's? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's why it's safety. So when you see something new, naturally gonna fear it, and that's so deeply engraved to us that because we're switching borders, it's almost like they're infringing on you, and that's how these wars start, because there's always been war, and that's the way we've always lived, and somehow we can't unprogram that part of us. At least some of us can't unprogram that part from us, and this is how wars develop and begin, because someone's always seen as a threat on something.
It's like a deep evolutionary instinct.
Yeah, but let's touch up a little bit on the sanctions. See what's actually going on. Even though we know these sanctions affect the middle class and impoverished class directly, and of course the higher ups do get affected as well. But it always starts with the majority of people, which is usually us. So one of the sanctions that's put on Russia has to deal with banks and financials. So U.S. President Joe Biden announced sanctions against a lot of Russian banks, Russian transactions, where he has disallowed the ability for people to make transactions with Russian companies. So he basically blacklisted Russian banks from being able to have business in the United States, and United States companies and banks. He kind of banned that from happening with Russia as well. Of course, it's only certain banks and certain companies. You can look this up yourself. I'm not going to name them. There's a bunch of them. But that just shows you what they could do, because the world that we live in, we have the internet, right? So a lot of stuff is done online. A lot of transactions are done through computers, through cables, through wires. So it's like easier to switch off, you could say. But so much finances and banking is done amongst countries that this does a really big hit on Russia. And it almost, when I was reading it, basically by just these bank and financial sanctions, about $134 billion were basically frozen and unable to be touched, and basically lost, you could say, which is wild, because that's a big portion of Russia's GDP, which is, like I said, directly going to impact the people, because now maybe some banks aren't going to have enough reserves for somebody to withdraw some money to buy food.
Yeah,
and it's wild,
especially if the ruble, the Russian currency, is falling underneath the penny now, and you're already poor. What happens now to that currency? What if now sanctions go up, the price of goods go up, and you can't afford things, you can't feed your family? That's the scary part to think about, because I have people that have been into Russia and they say it's poor, it's bad, and they want to get out of there. If you go to big cities like Moscow, yes, there's people that are rich, but anything else is poor and poverty, and it's farmland, it's rural, it's families that are freaking on the farm with like seven family in the household just running a farm, and they have nothing to do with anything, and they're going to get impacted. And that's like the messed up part about this.
Yeah, and even with, so I'm not sure if y'all have heard of SWIFT, but there has been some talks of disconnecting Russia from the company or the thing called SWIFT. So to give you a synopsis of what SWIFT is something that was created to allow transaction to happen amongst different countries and different people amongst those countries. So if you have a bank like Chase, there's a SWIFT number associated. And if you have like a store, like a shop, a drop shop, or any kind of shop, and you're having people pay you, you usually have to have SWIFT set up for that transaction to be accepted. Especially if you're doing overseas merchandise, buy anything from overseas, a lot of times those things need SWIFT accounts as well, because SWIFT facilitates these transactions and tracks them and makes sure everything gets sent to the proper places. And there's some talks of disconnecting with them. And SWIFT has partnered up with 11,000 institutions in over 200 countries. So that's a big part of the world. If you don't have a SWIFT account, you can't do business in a lot of countries. And that's crazy, because that is ultimately going to hurt once again the middleman.
Yeah, and especially also
people in the middle class. Not the middleman, but the middle class.
Middle class. They're also going after cryptocurrency, which I hope that the private industry of that sector doesn't crumble to that.
Yeah, when you told me that,
should be
it's
decentralized.
Yeah, if you're telling me that cryptocurrency is a next currency because it's this decentralized, it's yours, you can do whatever you want it, and now you're telling me that, hey, we're gonna cut it off to a country, that just shows me it's not really that decentralized. I'm not saying that what Russia is doing is bad. Is that we're in this fine line of war. So you have to really pick and choose what you're going to do to this country, because if you stop everything to this country, people are gonna die, regardless of if it's with bullets or what. A lot of people are going to die. So when Matt, you told me that they're trying to not allow crypto in Russia, that was mind blowing, because how are you going to make something decentralized, which is supposed to be non-political, not favoring one view, supposed to be this great thing that you can do whatever you want with it, and we understand that some people are not going to do bad things with it, but it is what it is because you want to stay decentralized. Then how are you going to now tell me that we're going to not allow it in Russia?
They're saying it's a loophole to the sanctions that they're creating. So technically it is, but it's decentralized for that reason. So now if we allow the world governments to tap into this industry, it's not going to be decentralized anymore. And that creates a lot of scary things, because look what's happening around the world, how governments, what they could do to their own people that you've seen in Australia. That's scary, and we should remain sovereign. Even going into the digital space, like with the metaverse, not to get off topic, you want to hold on to your digital identity and who you are, not sell that information off. And that's why it's so important to remain sovereign from those things, because sovereignty is important, even as an individual. With everything happening, no matter your opinion or how people think or telling you how to think, you are your own sovereign individual that could remain to do your own choice in life, because you have the divinity and the free will from God.
Yeah, and everything that has to do with financials and money should never be polarized and never be with a viewpoint. Because imagine if you live in a world where you get paid less as a nurse because of what you believe. That would be crazy. And that's kind of what you're doing now with cryptocurrency, because now you don't agree with one country, you're not allowing it to be used there. So now
we're going to ban its users.
And now right. So now imagine if they did that to US dollar, like, hey, like I said, we're going to pay you less because you have this viewpoint and not this viewpoint. So now you're associating something that people need to survive, money, because you got to buy food, you got to buy clothing, you got to buy shelter. Now you're taking that necessity and now aligning it with someone's viewpoint and someone's ideology, and not allowing it to be accessed for everybody. So now you're limiting what someone could do in their life and in the world, which should never be it. You should never associate emotions with money, with viewpoints with money, politics with money, because money is money. It's something you need to survive. Whatever you do to make money, you're taking that risk if it's illegal, but money shouldn't judge you on how you make it. It should never be like that, because money is money, and that's something that we all agree on. And if I want to pay you for something, I should have the right to pay for something. If you want to sell something and get money for something, you should have that right too, without me telling you, no, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, and that's what's also scary about that infrastructure bill that passed, because by 2026, they're trying to create like a kill switch on all cars, which is cool, because somebody that robbed the bank or did some crime, we could turn off their car and they're not going to get away. But what about for the sovereign individual? What if you don't pay a couple bills and then the government decides that you're a bad person for doing whatever and turns off your car? Look what happened with the whole
look at Snowden,
V-card thing.
Dudes in Russia now. Imagine if you're a whistleblower and want to release some crucial information that the government's been doing some crazy shit, and you release it, and now the government has a kill switch on your car. Guess what? You're not going to be able to drive your car. Or if there's a kill switch, what else is it going to have? Is that because you're going to have a backdoor of where you're driving to and from? Is that kill switch going to have some kind of tracking in it where it's going to record everything, every place you drive? Because technically it's going to have to, if it's a kill switch, it's going to have to know where you are, because it's being pinged somewhere. And if you're always pinging something, technically they always know where you are as soon as you start that car.
Yeah, they already do it with their cell phones.
And that's what, yeah. So yeah, kill switch sounds nice. It's very ideal. But remember, by having a kill switch, it means there's forever communication ongoing with your car and the facility of where that kill switch can be turned on or off. nonstop forever. Same way your phones are always on, and you're tracking your every little thing you do on it. Same now it's gonna be in your car.
Yeah.
Because for that kill switch to work, has to be connected to a grid, and that grid has to always be tracking it because it has to know where to send that signal. And you're always going to be a latitude and longitudinal point on a map.
Yeah, that's why I'm always about smaller government and more power to the people, but also talking about technology. And we didn't even mention this Russia episode, is how big corporations could have an influence in things like war now. For example, Russia disrupted online communications for Ukraine, and Elon Musk set up Starlink so the Ukrainian people could access internet through the freaking satellite. So corporations can be and going to start getting involved in things because of how much power they have, more than countries themselves. So yeah, crazy times, man, to think about.
Yeah, the U.S. has also put sanctions on individuals, which, believe it or not, the U.S. has the power to put sanctions on individuals. So in theory, they could have put sanctions on the head CEO of a Russian oil company, of a bank, of a business, and they could sanction them. So not only are you hurting a country, you can hurt somebody directly, and everybody that's directly aligned with that person is going to also get screwed for it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go over any names because I couldn't really find names. I'm not going to post names online because I would probably done some research, and they don't want me doing research about those people. These are some low-key people in high-key places. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And then who knows, just the rabbit hole of all this going on. Supposedly, Putin belongs to the World Economic Forum, and the current president of Ukraine also belongs to the World Economic Forum. And if you don't know what the World Economic Forum is, there's a whole episode on that we did on Cup of Nurses.
Economic Forum?
Forum, yeah. World Economic Forum. So there's a whole episode on that if you want to check out. So if those two players are in a group like that are led by globalists to create the future of where they want the world to be, then is this just like a giant pony show if they have the same meetings? But who knows? That's just opinion there. We don't know shit about that, but it's just crazy to think about. And then also, I want to stop there. I could talk about so much more, but yeah, it's interesting. Keep your eyes always open to the other perspective of what's happening in the world, just like we just presented you about all these details in history about Russia that you might have not known, and maybe have a different opinion about things. But at the end of the day, war is cruel, unfair, innocent people die, and we don't think that we're not pro anything of the choice of what was made on war, but we just shine some perspective on this episode just to give you an idea of the bigger picture, the history of what's leading to this invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah. Just take a look back over the last couple of years, how our presidents have reacted to what's going on in Europe and Russia, because I'll speak for myself here. It's a little sketch. So when Trump was president, he had lots of communication with Ukraine and Russia. Now Joe Biden is president, and we know the whole Hunter Biden story with laptops. We know that the Biden family and Ukraine were also very close and in talks. And now, like Matt stated, Vladimir Putin, which is the president of Russia, and the president of Ukraine, both are in the World Economic Forum. And now there's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine. But yet, everybody's been in communication with everybody for the last, I want to say, 5 to 10 years with really good kinds of communication. So, I don't know, something smelly going on, just like with the whole China thing where, supposedly didn't come out of a lab. Now it came out of a lab. And now we have this whole Russia thing and Ukraine thing where there was talks amongst all three countries, and now there's a war going on. Kind of sketchy as well.
Yeah, and that's why you listen to a couple of nurses to kind of figure out what's happening, and we'll pop you with the news.
Yeah, one last thing. The U.S. is also amongst talks with chip manufacturers and slowly thinking about putting up sanctions with chip exports and imports.
Damn.
Which also hurts the middle class directly, because now not only hurts them, if you think about it, it might hurt us as well, because I'm not sure where we get our chips from. I know the Taiwanese semiconductor company is one of the biggest ones, but I'm not sure what our exact transactions are with Russia and stuff like that. But imagine if some Apple part comes from Russia, and now there's a war going on in Russia. Russia's not gonna give us the Apple part or that resource we need to create this Apple part, and now that's technically a sanction against us, where now our iPhones might be up in price, which hurts us indirectly from what's going on in Russia, which is crazy.
Yeah,
but it's all.
Speaking of sanction, like,
so I feel like, real quick, I feel like the more of a shit show there is going on in the world, the more shit changes on a daily basis, and the more life changes, because when there's a shit show going on, they're always putting things back together, but nothing is ever put back together the same way it was initially. And I feel like this always happens when there's so with all this stuff going on, there's always an opportunity for great change. Same way when there's economic collapses, there's a great opportunity for change. When there's pandemics, there's a great opportunity for change. And now we have a war going on, which is another great opportunity for change. And usually that opportunity for change is a greater change in power taken from the citizens and local governments, and then being given to the bigger governments and courts and all that kind of stuff. Usually what happens,
good synopsis.
I'm gonna have you quote me on that one for sure, because I'm gonna tell you that has always been happening since like 9/11, when we were 9/11 we were still at
shorties.
We were still at the age where we weren't able to grasp what was going on, but then we were growing. But then after a few years after that, we started realizing that every time something crazy happens, it's almost like our freedoms get restricted.
Transfer power.
Yeah, and then we look back at it. We had the Industrial Revolution, where auto manufacturing was at an all-time high. Industrials were huge. Detroit was booming, and then we switched to shipping stuff overseas, which was a giant shit show. And then with that giant shit show came a switch in power from industrials to outsourcing jobs. So now we have the tech boom, the internet era, where things shifted from power from a lot of these retail shops and companies to now this whole online thing. And there's always a shift in power going from one to another. But with the shift in power comes some kind of a drastic shit show in the world to better ease that change.
Yeah, this made me also think about the whole China thing, and it's a state-owned app, TikTok, and it's highly addictive. And if we're trying to sanction that country, we did with the whole past U.S. government. Imagine what China could do. Okay, if America's messing around with us, we'll just tweak the algorithm to make these citizens stupid as hell. And then people on TikTok are just sucked into short things that are promoting pranks, dumb activity, twerking, sexuality, and are technically hurting the American public. That's power of social media, and that's information warfare, where you could hurt a whole country from the inside out.
Yeah, if you want perspective, the U.S. has a population of 350 million people, roughly, and China has a population of 1.4 billion people. So if you think about it, China has 4 times more people than we do, and Russia has about 150 million, and so US is about twice the size of Russia. So not to point fingers or to draw eyeballs onto something, but if I was a US diplomat, a person in power in the United States, I'd probably be more worried about China than Russia's influence in Europe, because we vastly outgrow Russia, even though Russia is powerful militarily, and if we start a war with Russia, we're probably going to go into World War III. But still, we should be focusing on ourselves a lot more than we focus on other countries and their business. I'm just saying, we're not perfect. The United States isn't perfect. Let's try to fix our own shit before we fix someone else's shit. We can help them out. We can have conversations. And if people want us to intervene, then we can intervene. But that has to be as like a last effort, because we don't want war going on in our soil, and we definitely don't want to send our people to someone else's soil either, because that's not right as well.
All right, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a pretty long one. Talk about different things outside of nursing, but stuff we enjoy as well.
Yep. Have a great day, y'all.
Peace.
Nope.